Praise the Lord, saints. This is Elder Adrian Hammond, and I'm looking back this time instead of looking forward because of the month that we just passed, which is February. February, we usually celebrate Black History Month, but there have been some arguments against having a Black History Month. That essentially, that you should be celebrating something every month. So why are you taking one month and elevating an entire people? And that's the same thing they talk about with Martin Luther King's birthday for Cesar Chavez, so on. But I want to bring you back to what Paul had to deal with, whereas some people had a special day to celebrate certain things, maybe to able to worship God, or to dedicate it for, essentially to dedicate it to remembering Jesus. Like for instance, the Jews, they had a Passover, and it was directed by God that they would remember that every year. It was looking back to see how the Lord took them out of Egypt's hand. Because remember, Egypt was a country as one of the top empires in the world at that particular time, with lots of chariots, armies, hard to match, if you could even match it. And their pantheon of gods were, well, they had illustrated it to be a formidable force. But Yahweh, the self-existent one, the only God, if you talk about gods, that was made of himself. There is no beginning date with him, nor end date with him. That in itself put him above all other gods. That's if they were real. We know they're not. But in any case, the Jews celebrated that special day, or that special time, with Passover. Then you also had the Feast of Tabernacles, how they remembered their time in the wilderness, where they had to live in booths or tents. And it just shows you how far the Lord had took them. And Paul had just said, some people will celebrate those days, and probably more besides. Some esteems every day to be the same, and they celebrate God regardless. That's the whole idea. Whether you pick a special day to really celebrate him, or do you celebrate him some every single day? Now you have to remember, you're talking not just to the Jews, you're talking to Gentiles who didn't go through a Passover, who didn't go through a wilderness experience. So Passover to them would be, well, what's that? And Paul knew that. So he didn't belabor the point of making them observe a Passover that they don't even know about. Now, the question I guess you may be asking is, why am I relating that to Black History Month? There will be those that would say, well, we should celebrate history every month. And that's true. But it has to be history that is that gives fair due to everyone that participated in history. Usually what happens, and this is not just the fault of the United States, it's for any culture, that you will highlight the cultures that's the majority or the most powerful. You say to the victor belongs the spoils, or it is the winners that write history, and all that's true. You may even talk about that in a theological sense. There are certain things that are not stated in terms of what Christians would believe, and the reason why is because those that write the history are of a particular religious mindset or theology or denomination. Those that have, or those that belong to those that have a particular, not quite the same as others, you don't hear about them as if they didn't exist. And all of a sudden, boom, okay, now you hear them. But it's only because, essentially, in many cases, it's the victors that write the history. And in the United States, that's exactly what happened. The victors wrote the history. So there was no Black history. There was no Latino history. There was no Asian history. It was just history by the dominant culture. Now, this is not to blame anyone today. If you are really searching to celebrate the history of everybody, we can start today. Whereas if we don't need a Black History Month, then we should celebrate Black people who contributed to American society. We should celebrate Asians who contributed to American society. We should celebrate Latinos who contributed to American society. And as we go through, we won't need a Black History Month. The problem, though, is that in much of your history books, and this is what I grew up with, they were just starting. So I heard about Benjamin Banneker, the man who served as the architect for the White House and also the plans for Washington, D.C. I heard of Crispus Attucks, essentially one of the first ones who were one of the first people that were killed in a Revolutionary War. You heard of course, George Washington Carver. He did a lot of good things, just using all of a peanut and using it for various purposes to actually help mankind. These are the things that, Charles Drew, who was the one who helped to invent plasma. And unfortunately, he died needing plasma, but being refused to take the plasma. That's a tragedy, but we remember him. But you don't really hear that much of these people because they're not part of the dominant culture. And to me, that is sad because you miss what others have done, not just to make us pump up with pride, but to realize that everybody in this country, of every culture, has contributed something to this country. It's funny because when we go, and there's the Olympics, and as long as someone puts on the USA uniform, we're cheering for them. Yeah, all right. You're running, you're jumping, you're skating, you're skiing, you're whatever you're doing. Oh my goodness, we love it. Because you were in the American uniform. And that's very interesting. As you would cheer for them here, but then forget about them when they come back to the United States and incorporate themselves back into society. And that's something that we shouldn't be doing. In the Bible, we read that it wasn't just Jews that were important. You had Melchizedek, who was essentially, he was the priest of the Most High God. Some people say that he was a theophany. I don't know about that. I just believe that essentially he was one that believed in Yahweh. He had the revelation of it. Because you have to remember, the numbers may be very few, but there were those who believed in the one Yahweh. There's a book of one. It's Job. Job, I don't believe, was a Jew. He wasn't a Hebrew, but he believed in God. And his faith was immortalized in a book of the Bible. But you got Melchizedek. You have Jethro, a Midianite, who actually gave Moses some very helpful information regarding judging the people of Israel. The Bible was very clear about Jethro's part in helping. And that's my sister there. She's trying to get in the door. Let's see if she can get in. I'm hoping she can. Yep, she's in. There she goes. She's in. But we have Jethro, who essentially, regardless of where he came from a country whose people later on tried to overrun Israel. But Jethro himself was part of who was mentioned in the Bible. Rahab, the harlot who kept the spies so that they wouldn't get discovered, allowed Israel to conquer Jericho. But that was Rahab. If Rahab wasn't there, then it would have been much more difficult. Maybe they would have conquered, but it wouldn't have been nearly as easy. Ruth. What about Ruth? Ruth was one who essentially was a Moabite. Because of her faith in God, her adoption of Yahweh as her God, from the union of the Moabite Ruth with the Israelite Boaz, came the great-grandson, David, of whom we also take the genealogy through and end up with Jesus as well. So these are people that are of different nations who the Bible gives full credit because of their faith, because of what they were able to do as they claimed a strange God, so to speak, for their own. And that was a wonderful thing. Because of this matter of thinking, we also have to give credit to those who don't belong to the major culture, who has given, either through invention, through achievement, whatever it may have been, you give them full credit. Because without that, the story of the United States is not fully complete. because there's missing chapters that should not be missed. When there comes a time when both the good and the bad of everyone can be mentioned on a regular basis, then maybe at that time we won't need Black History Month. But today is not that time. God bless you. May He keep you. I love you all. In Jesus' name.